Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we explore powerful moments of compassion that can change everything. Today's story will take you on a journey with Ethan Carter, a billionaire who encounters two abandoned children in the streets of New York. What begins as an unexpected act of kindness leads to a life-changing realization. Stick around to see how a single night can transform a person's world. The city lights flickered like distant stars beneath Ethan Carter's penthouse, casting long shadows over the sprawling urban landscape. From his floor-to-ceiling windows, he gazed at the city below, the hum of life continuing while he felt a nagging emptiness within. At 50, Ethan had everything: wealth, influence, a sprawling empire, but it had come at a cost. His once vibrant ambitions now felt hollow. The business deals that had once fueled him now left him drained, and his success had isolated him from the world around him. He glanced over to his desk where a photograph caught his eye. A younger version of himself with his former business partner, Lucas Harper. It was a picture from before the ambition, before the betrayals, a memory that still stung, reminding him of the cost of his rise to the top. He could hear Lucas's voice in his mind. "You'll regret this." Ethan had pushed him out of their company years ago, choosing business over friendship, and the regret still haunted him. Ethan shook his head, trying to dismiss the thoughts, but the weight of his past lingered. He moved to the minibar in the corner of his office, reaching for the whiskey, hoping for some relief. But before he could pour a glass, his phone buzzed, snapping him out of his reverie. It was a message from his security team. Disturbance near downtown property. Ethan frowned. Normally, he would delegate this to someone else. But tonight, something stirred within him, a need to take control, to do something, anything, without thinking. He grabbed his coat and left his office, stepping into the cold night air. The drive through the city felt surreal. The streets were darker here, far from the polished districts where he spent most of his time. This was a part of town Ethan rarely visited: old buildings, abandoned corners, a stark contrast to the luxury of his own life. The headlights of his car sliced through the darkness, and it was then that he saw them. Under the faint light of a street lamp, a small figure sat hunched over, cradling something in his arms. Ethan slammed on the brakes. A child, barely visible in the dim light. The boy looked no older than 6, and beside him, wrapped in a ragged blanket, was a baby. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. This was not the disturbance he had expected, but something more urgent, something that cut through the veneer of his world. He stepped out of the car, walking cautiously toward the child. The boy's eyes met his, wide with fear, but also a strange mix of hope. Ethan knelt down in front of him, trying to appear less threatening. "Hey, are you okay? Where are your parents?" Ethan asked, his voice softer than he intended. The boy didn't respond immediately, his grip on the baby tightening. Ethan noticed the baby's stillness, unaware, or perhaps unconscious, of the cold night. The boy looked up at him, his face full of distrust. "My name's Ethan," he said gently. "What's yours?" The boy hesitated for a long moment before whispering. No, Ethan repeated, nodding. "And who's this?" he asked, pointing to the baby. "Liam," the boy replied quietly. "My brother." Ethan's chest tightened. This wasn't what he had expected tonight. He should call the authorities, get help. But something in the boy's eyes, the way he clung to the baby, made him pause. Ethan's instincts told him not to leave them out here. "Not tonight. It's not safe for you and Liam out here." Ethan said softly, "How about you come with me? I can take you somewhere warm, where you'll be safe." The boy's eyes filled with suspicion. "You won't separate us?" His voice wavered with fear. Ethan's heart clenched at the question. The boy's desperation, his protectiveness over the infant, struck a chord deep inside him. "No," Ethan promised. "I won't separate you. You'll stay together." After a moment's hesitation, Noah nodded. Ethan gently helped him to his feet. The boy was thin, trembling in the cold, and Ethan wrapped his coat around both of them as they climbed into the car. As the warmth of the car surrounded them, Ethan glanced at the boy in the rearview mirror. Noah held Liam tightly, his tired eyes watching Ethan carefully, as though uncertain whether this act of kindness was real. The drive back to Ethan's mansion was quiet. The city passed by in a blur. But Ethan's thoughts were far from the business empire he had built. His mind was on Noah and Liam, on how this simple act of compassion felt so much more significant than anything he had ever done in the boardroom. As he pulled up to his mansion, Ethan had made a decision. He would give these children a safe place for the night. Tomorrow, he would figure out what to do next. But tonight, they would be safe, under his roof. The grand facade of the mansion loomed before him as he opened the door, leading Noah and Liam inside. The house, usually silent and cold, felt different now, charged with a new energy. As he watched Maria, his longtime housekeeper, tend to the children, he felt a strange pull in his chest. This was not the life he had envisioned for himself. But for the first time in years, he wondered if it might be the life he needed. The night stretched on in a strange, almost surreal calm. Inside the lavish mansion, the usual silence that permeated Ethan's grand estate seemed to have dissipated. The once cold, sterile rooms were now filled with an energy he hadn't expected. Ethan stood in the hallway, watching as Maria, his longtime housekeeper, gently cared for Noah and Liam. The children, freshly bathed and dressed in oversized t-shirts, looked out of place in the grand surroundings. They were so small, so fragile. Maria, who had worked for Ethan for over a decade, looked at him with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Mr. Carter," she whispered as she approached him in the hallway. "Are you sure about this? Shouldn't we notify the authorities right away?" Ethan's jaw tightened at the question. It had been on his mind all evening, but hearing it spoken aloud only made the weight of the decision more real. He had made a promise to Noah to keep them together, to keep them safe for the night. He wasn't sure why, but there was something about these children, something about Noah's protective nature toward Liam, that made him hesitate. "Not yet, Maria," Ethan replied quietly, his gaze lingering on the door where Noah and Liam had been settled for the night. "Let them have one night of peace. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Maria nodded, though her face was still full of doubt. She had always been loyal to Ethan, but this felt like something different. She had never seen him act with such uncertainty. As she turned to leave, Ethan's mind raced. He was used to making decisions swiftly, decisively. In the world of business, there was no room for hesitation, no space for emotional impulse. But this situation, this unexpected encounter with two abandoned children, was a different kind of dilemma. The weight of the decision pressed on him, and for the first time in years, he questioned everything that had led him here. He slowly made his way to the guest room where the children had been settled. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear the quiet sounds of Noah whispering to Liam as the baby shifted restlessly in his arms. Ethan stood for a moment in the doorway, watching them. Noah was holding Liam as if his life depended on it, his young face etched with worry. "Are they all right?" Ethan asked, stepping into the room. His voice was softer now, almost hesitant. Noah looked up, and for a moment, Ethan saw something in the boy's eyes, something raw and vulnerable that made his chest tighten. "They're okay," Noah said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we don't have anywhere else to go." The simplicity of the statement hit Ethan harder than he expected. No, they didn't have anywhere else to go. And here he was, someone who had built his entire life around wealth and power, offering them nothing more than a temporary refuge. It felt hollow. Somehow, Ethan walked over and sat down on the edge of the bed, his eyes on the two children. "You're safe here for tonight," he said, trying to reassure them. "I'll make sure you're taken care of. But I need you to tell me what happened. How did you end up out there?" Noah's gaze shifted, but the boy didn't answer immediately. He looked down at Liam, his fingers gently stroking the baby's hair. Finally, after a long pause, Noah spoke, his voice small but steady. We were living with our mom." Noah began, the words seeming to hang in the air between them. "But then one day, she just didn't come back. We waited for a long time, but she never came." His eyes filled with tears, but he quickly wiped them away. "I had to take care of Liam. I don't know what happened to her. I don't know where she went." Ethan's heart ached for the boy. He had seen the pain of loss before, loss that was masked by ambition, by wealth, by distractions. But this was different. This was raw. This was the pain of a child who had lost the one person he trusted the most. Ethan had never been good at dealing with emotions, especially not his own. But hearing Noah's quiet story, hearing the desperation in his voice, forced him to confront something inside himself that he had long buried. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. He didn't know what else to say. What could he possibly say to make a child feel better about the fact that he had been abandoned by the very person who was supposed to love him the most? Noah didn't respond immediately, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. He wasn't looking for pity. He was looking for someone to believe him, to hear him, to see him. Ethan had built a life on his ability to fix problems, to solve things with logic and reason. But here, in this room with these two children, logic had no place. Ethan sat in silence for a while, tried to process everything. He had been a businessman for so long that the personal side of life, the human side, felt foreign to him. But as he looked at Noah and Liam, he realized that his wealth, his empire, meant nothing in the face of this kind of vulnerability. There was no amount of money that could solve the pain of abandonment. No boardroom strategy that could erase the loneliness these children must have felt. Eventually, Ethan stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. He thought about his own childhood, the isolation he had felt, the years spent trying to prove himself to a world that seemed indifferent. He had worked his entire life to escape that loneliness, to build something that would matter. And yet, standing here, with these children who had lost so much, he realized that maybe the one thing he had been missing all along was something simple, something human. "Tomorrow," Ethan said, turning back to face Noah, "we'll figure out what to do. But tonight, you and Liam are safe here. You don't have to worry anymore." Noah looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of skepticism and hope. "Promise." Ethan hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "I promise." The weight of his promise hung in the air, heavier than any business deal he had ever signed. But as he looked at the two children, Ethan felt a stirring inside him, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Tonight, his life had changed in ways he couldn't yet understand. But somehow, he knew this was only the beginning of something far greater than anything he had ever built. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Ethan's mansion, casting a soft glow over the vast marble floors. The usual grandeur of the place felt different today, almost unfamiliar. Ethan sat at the grand kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hand, staring out at the lush grounds of his estate. His mind was racing, as it often did when faced with difficult decisions. But today, it wasn't about business. It was about Noah and Liam. Maria had prepared breakfast, but Ethan couldn't eat. He hadn't been able to sleep much either. The image of Noah's face, the fear and resolve that had been etched into his young features, kept replaying in his mind. He had promised the boy that they were safe. But what did that really mean? For someone like Ethan, safety was a privilege, not a guarantee. But for children like Noah and Liam, it should have been a right. As he sipped the coffee, he considered his options. The logical thing, the safe thing, was to call the authorities. He had a responsibility to make sure they were placed in proper care, somewhere they could receive the support they needed. But the more he thought about it, the more he knew it wasn't so simple. This wasn't just about doing what was legally right. Something in his gut told him that Noah and Liam needed him, even if he wasn't sure what that meant yet. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Maria entered, her brow furrowed as she glanced at Ethan. "Mr. Carter, there's someone here to see you. A detective." Ethan froze. The weight of the moment crashed down on him. His heart skipped a beat. It was the kind of visit he never wanted to receive, especially not with two vulnerable children under his roof. He put his coffee cup down, straightening up as he stood. "Send them in," he said, his voice firm despite the nerves building inside him. A moment later, the door opened, and a man in a crisp suit stepped into the room. Detective Jane Carter, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, held a file in her hand. She looked directly at Ethan, sizing him up before she spoke. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice steady. "I'm Detective Carter. I've been investigating a missing persons case, and it appears we may have a lead." Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. He could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him, threatening to unravel everything. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What lead?" The detective flipped open the file, revealing photographs of Noah and Liam. These children were reported missing a few days ago. Their mother, a woman named Rebecca Calloway, disappeared without a trace. "We're still trying to piece together what happened, but we know they've been abandoned on the streets of this city." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His mind flashed back to the moment he had found them. How small and helpless they had looked. How vulnerable they had been. His promise to Noah rang louder in his ears now than ever before. I found them last night," Ethan said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "They were on the street, alone." Detective Carter studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as if reading between the lines. "And you brought them here?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "I couldn't leave them there." She nodded slowly. "I appreciate you doing the right thing. It's rare to see someone in your position take responsibility for a situation like this." Her gaze softened, just for a moment, before returning to business. "But you need to understand, Mr. Carter, that this is a matter for the authorities now. These children belong in the care of child services, not in the home of a private citizen." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth of her words hit him. He had known this moment would come. The question now was what he would do. Was he willing to let go of the children, even after everything that had transpired? "You're right," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been thinking about what's best for them, and I know they need care, professional care, but they've been through so much already. I want them to be safe." Detective Carter's eyes softened again, and for a moment, Ethan could see the empathy behind her professional exterior. She took a step closer. "I know it's hard," she said, "but this is what's best. They'll be in good hands." Ethan looked at the photos of Noah and Liam again, his heart aching. It was a gut-wrenching decision, but deep down, he knew he had to do what was right for them, even if it meant letting go of something he had started to feel a strange connection to. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll call child services." The next few days were a blur. Ethan did what he knew was necessary. He made the calls, arranged for child services to take custody of Noah and Liam, and watched as they were driven away from his estate. The mansion, which had once felt so alive with the presence of the two children, now felt hollow again. But as Ethan stood in the doorway, watching the car disappear down the long driveway, he realized something that had eluded him for years. For all the wealth, all the power, all the accomplishments in the world, there was one thing that had always been missing: connection. Noah and Liam had come into his life unexpectedly, shaking him out of the cold, calculated routine that had defined his existence. And in that brief time, they had changed him. They had forced him to confront a side of himself he had long ignored, the side that cared, the side that felt. In their vulnerability, they had awakened something in him that had been buried for too long. Ethan stood there, letting the quiet settle around him. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he would ever see Noah and Liam again. But one thing was certain: he would never forget them. They had given him a gift, a reminder that, no matter how much one may accumulate, what truly matters in life is the ability to care, to connect, and to act with compassion. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the grounds, Ethan Carter felt a shift within himself, a shift he hadn't anticipated but would carry with him for the rest of his life. And with that, the journey of his transformation had only just begun. Thank you for watching this touching story on Empathy Stories. Sometimes, it's the unexpected moments that bring the greatest changes in our lives. We hope this story inspired you to reflect on kindness and the power of compassion. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that move the heart. See you in the next video.